Caracas. The year is 1949. Ilich Ramírez Sánchez was not named after a saint, but a symbol, Vladimir Ilich Lenin. His father, a militant Marxist lawyer, believed his firstborn was destined to carry the torch of revolution. By the time Ilich could walk, he was already leafing through Das Kapital in a house where Che Guevara's smile adorned the walls like a family portrait. From a young age, Ilich knew he was different, privileged yet radical, brilliant but restless. His classmates at the elite Fermentoro school admired his wit and multilingual charm, but he didn't dream of cars or careers. He dreamed of barricades, liberation, and the global proletariat. In 1968, he was sent to the Patrice Lumumba University in Moscow, a Soviet institution built to mold the future revolutionaries of the developing world. There, Ilich absorbed Marxism with a cold precision, but the romance began to rot. Soviet communism, he realized, was drowning in bureaucracy and hypocrisy. The lectures were dry, the ideology diluted. The fire in his blood demanded more than theory. He needed a cause, a war. That's when he drifted east, toward Beirut, where flames of real revolution still burned. The Middle East was the epicenter of anti-imperialist struggle, and Ilich found his calling in the shadows of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, PFLP, under the mentorship of Dr. Wadi Haddad, a man known as much for his intellect as his ruthlessness. In Beirut, the boy from Caracas was reborn. Training camps in the Bekaa Valley replaced Moscow's lecture halls. Ilich learned to fire AK-47s, build bombs, vanish into crowds. But it wasn't just combat, it was transformation. He studied espionage, sabotage, infiltration. Fluent in 5 languages, he was the ideal operative. Calm, charming, and utterly committed. But it came with a price. He learned to kill. The first operations were messy. In London, he bungled a grenade attack on a Jewish target. The fuse malfunctioned. He disappeared before the police arrived. Surveillance missions followed, cloaked in suits and briefcases. Ilich wandered European cities, identifying embassies, arms depots, oil executives. He recruited students, stole passports, and wove together a network of quiet, disciplined operatives. By the early 1970s, Paris had become his playground. Beneath the elegance of the Champs-Élysées, Ilich plotted future chaos in smoky cafes and rented flats. But behind the charm and confidence, there was a war inside. He still called himself a freedom fighter, but every step deeper into violence chipped away at the idealism of his youth. Was this revolution or revenge? Then came the turning point. In 1975, Ilich coordinated an attack that would launch him into global infamy. A high-stakes operation was unfolding. He planned with precision, waited patiently, and executed with cold resolve. For now, the details were still buried in code names and classified files. But one thing was clear. Carlos, the code name given to him by the PFLP, was no longer a student, a dreamer, or even just a militant. He was something else. A ghost in the cities, a weapon with a cause, a name whispered in the corridors of European intelligence services. The Jackal had begun to prowl. But beneath the layers of strategy and steel, somewhere buried deep in his bones, was still the boy from Caracas. The one who believed the world could be changed by fire. And now the world would try to stop him. December 21st, 1975, Vienna. Snow fell over the Austrian capital like a lullaby, softening the edges of a city that was about to be shattered. Inside the luxurious OPEC headquarters, oil ministers gathered for what they thought was a routine meeting. Then the doors burst open. Gunmen stormed in. At the center of them, calm, sharp-eyed, and cold as the steel in his hands, stood a man the world didn't yet know. Carlos. He called himself a soldier of the Palestinian cause. But this wasn't just a political stunt. This was a message to the world. No one was untouchable. For 48 hours, Carlos held 11 oil ministers hostage, demanded safe passage, negotiated with Austrian authorities while toying with execution lists, and when the deal was made, he boarded a plane with the hostages and disappeared into the Middle East skies. No arrests, no blood, no trail. The press was stunned. Intelligence agencies scrambled. Then came the name that stuck, Carlos the Jackal, coined by a reporter who discovered a copy of Frederick Forsyth's novel, The Day of the Jackal, among his abandoned belongings. A myth was born, but this was no fiction. Carlos now moved like smoke through the geopolitical underworld of the Cold War. He built safe houses in Paris, Budapest, and Tripoli, trained operatives, laundered money through sympathetic embassies. His black book included East German Stasi officials, Libyan diplomats, and Syrian intelligence handlers. To some, he was a hero. To others, a hired gun. To all, he was dangerous. In the backrooms of Langley, Tel Aviv, and Paris, a new kind of war was being waged. Intelligence agencies began mapping Carlos like a virus. The CIA and Mossad created shared profiles. France's DST tapped phones. Stasi defectors leaked fragments of his movements, whispers of meetings in The Hague, sightings in Damascus, lovers in Tripoli. Still, Carlos stayed ahead. He used plastic surgery to tweak his appearance, just enough to vanish in plain sight. Fake passports bore names from every continent. When agents closed in, he melted into shadows with the help of embassy insiders and double agents. He was never in the same place for long, yet always exactly where he needed to be. But power came at a price. The fire of revolution that once burned in his chest was cooling. More and more, Carlos worked for whoever paid the most. Libya hired him to target dissidents. Syria gave him shelter for favors. Ideology faded. Loyalty became transactional. The revolutionary became a mercenary. By the late 1980s, the Cold War's tectonic plates began to shift. East Germany collapsed. Soviet influence waned. Funding dried up. Sanctuaries vanished, and with them, Carlos's armor. His friends became liabilities. His lovers whispered his secrets to Western agents. His name, once a symbol of defiance, was now a liability to the very regimes that once protected him. In Damascus, Carlos found himself under tight surveillance by Syrian intelligence, the same people who once called him an asset. He no longer planned missions. He drank, watched the news, and raged at the changing world. Once the hunter, he could now sense the pack drawing closer. The jackal had become the prey. But even as his ideology crumbled, his instincts remained razor-sharp. He sensed betrayals before they came, survived multiple assassination attempts, one in Budapest, another in The Hague. Each time he escaped. Barely. The chase had become personal. For the intelligence world, Carlos was the last great ghost of the Cold War, the man they couldn't catch. He represented chaos, embarrassment, and unfinished business. For Carlos, the world had turned upside down. He once believed in revolution. Now he trusted only survival, and survival meant staying ahead. But time, like every enemy, was closing in. By the early 1990s, Damascus had turned cold, not just in weather, but in welcome. Once a prized guest of the Syrian regime, Carlos the Jackal now lived in the shadows of his own legend. The government of Hafez al-Assad, under pressure from Western diplomats and eager for global legitimacy, no longer found value in harboring a revolutionary-turned relic. His phone lines were tapped, his movements monitored. He was watched more than he was protected. Carlos, once the hunter, now paced in silence, aging, heavy-set, paranoid. He could feel it, the walls closing in. The Cold War was over. Ideological lines had blurred, and former enemies were now uneasy allies. One by one, the regimes that had shielded him, East Germany, Libya, even Syria, had either collapsed or cooled. In 1991, Carlos made his move. He vanished from Damascus and reappeared in Khartoum, Sudan, believing its Islamist regime would offer sanctuary. Sudan was still hostile to the West, but cracks were forming. President Omar al-Bashir was playing a delicate game, entertaining old revolutionaries while secretly warming to French and American diplomacy. Carlos had no idea he'd just walked into a trap. French intelligence had not stopped hunting him. They had been tracking whispers, intercepting calls, analyzing satellite images. And now, thanks to a well-placed Sudanese informant, they had a location. A private hospital in Khartoum. Carlos was undergoing surgery. Hernia, vulnerable, sedated. It was the perfect moment. August 14th, 1994. The order came down. Operation underway. A team of French agents, backed by Sudanese cooperation, surrounded Carlos's rented villa on a dusty street in Khartoum. There was no shootout, no last stand, just a syringe, a sedative, and silence. They whisked him away on a secret flight to Paris, drugged and cuffed, without even time to realize what was happening. After 2 decades of evasion, betrayal, and bloodshed, Carlos the Jackal had finally been captured. The moment he landed in France, the media pounced. Cameras swarmed the airport. Anchors gasped at the sight. The infamous Jackal, now bloated, graying, a ghost of the legend. But even in chains, Carlos carried himself like a general, arrogant, composed, and utterly unrepentant. The trial began in 1997, and it was pure theater. Carlos used the courtroom as his final stage. He quoted Che Guevara, Marx, and Mao, called himself a professional revolutionary, smirked as victims' families wept. He insisted he was a prisoner of imperialism, not a terrorist. But the jury saw past the performance. They saw the man who had planted bombs in Paris, who had orchestrated assassinations, kidnappings, and chaos across continents. They saw the bodies, the broken lives, and they gave him life in prison. Carlos was sent to Clairvaux prison, where the days became gray, long, and meaningless. No more safe houses, no more coded messages, no more revolution, just walls. But the story didn't end there. Books, films, and documentaries revived the myth. In fiction, he remained the shadowy anti-hero, the ghost who haunted intelligence files, the perfect spy thriller archetype. Some even claimed he had struck secret deals or escaped justice in part. Conspiracies bloomed. The real man, however, was forgotten, buried beneath the legend. Carlos had once believed he could change the world, that bombs and bullets could bend history. But in the end, he was just a man, a brilliant, dangerous, misguided man, caught in the storm of his own making. He had become what all ghosts eventually do, trapped, faded, forgotten by time.